President of Oregon Tech. It's our pleasure to welcome all of you to our campus. A very special visitor with us today. At this time, I'm going to invite Mayor Westfall to come up and introduce our special visitor.
Good morning. I am Mayor Carol Westfall on behalf of the City of Klamath Falls. I wish to welcome you to Senator Jeff Merkely's 2018 Town Hall meeting. Thank you, OIT, for hosting this informative event with Senator Merkley, and thank you all for attending. At this time, I'd like you to stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have the local leaders identify themselves and stand, please? Okay, and now a little about our distinguished guest. Senator Jeff Merkely. During his service as state representative and as our Oregon Senator, Jeff Merkely has emphasized fighting for the success of Oregon's working families. That means fighting for good paying jobs, strong public support, and affordable college and health care. Jeff is a native Oregonian and a son of a millwright. He was born in Myrtle Creek, Oregon, and has moved his family with timber economy to Roseburg and then Multnomah County. He was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 1998, and in 2007, he became Speaker of the Oregon House and held that post until his election to the US Senate. He began his involvement in policy as an intern for Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield in 2009. He was sworn in the same Senate seat once held by Mark Hatfield. Jeff holds an open town hall in every Oregon county every year. This is his 16th town hall this year and his 340th overall town hall, and we are happy to have him here. Please welcome Oregon U.S. Senator, and help me in welcoming U.S. Senator Jeff Merkely.
Thank you very much, Mayor and President Naganathan. Thank you for hosting us here at Oregon Tech. And it's great to see so many people coming out to be part of the community conversation. The host of challenges that we have, we'll get to shortly. But at the beginning of each town hall, I like to put a spotlight on an organization that has a very positive role in the community. And today we're going to put that spotlight on the School Guardian Project, which is sponsored by Citizens for Safe Schools. And Karen Hughes is here, I believe. Karen, come on up. Karen, welcome. Karen is involved in leading this effort to really take on the issue of bullying in the Klamath schools. And I'm going to have you kind of describe a little bit of what all you've been up to, if you could.
Well, thanks for coming today. We really, really appreciate you coming to Klamath. This project was a dream and an idea about 3 years ago. We started it just with citizens coming together, support of Citizens for Safe Schools, rode spirited, tirelessly working day in and day out in the hallways with the students. And we seek to bring volunteers into our schools to support staff and students, so to increase the safety in their environment. In the last 3 months, a huge commitment was made by Citizens for Safe Schools, and they've just hired a position for this program. And right now our focus is bringing in volunteers into the common areas, into the lunchroom, on the buses, at pickup and drop off. And with the national conversation, we 3 years ago started this to sort of put our arms around the school and say, what can we do to help? You know, and bringing our families in and creating an environment where they were supported and So can I have them come up? So all my volunteers, if you could come up, and any board members, we have a steering board, and this is Rose Beardsley, and she's actually started a mental health component within our school. Yeah, and this is just the best of the best in Klamath, and one of our great resources in Jeff is our volunteers, and they are amazing. And Rose will let you have 2 minutes for her turning lane.
Thank you. So I actually have stepped away from the school guardian project because Ponderosa Middle School has one of the most innovative new programs that I've ever seen, called an integrated wellness center within the school. It's a place where students who might be having a tough time can come get a 10-minute break, talk to somebody, actually do some science-based activities that are based around how to do resilient building. So if they're angry, if they're sad, if they're anxious, there's physical activities or puzzles and things that are scientifically based that help them. Our school also has access to counselors, to the health office, and to peer-to-peer support. We have an area that is set aside that is very quiet and calming, including science-based music that helps change the way the brain works and calms down the brain or excites the brain, changes the direction the brain is going. We give support in other areas as connecting families to support outside of the school when it's needed. And this innovative program was designed by our school counselor and our school nurse, Nancy Rupp and Wendy Niskanen. And my job has become the coordinator for this program. And thanks to the School Guardian Project and having me in that school to begin with, I was finally able to see, wow, we have the ability to change the lives of every student in this middle school of 640 plus kids. And the Guardian Project has been the base of that, and I hope to see the Guardian Project expand to other schools because of the good work that they're doing.
Thank you, Rose.
You can see how one project of engagement that makes schools a safer, better place for every student to thrive begets other efforts. And just want to say thank you to all of you, and as a symbol of appreciation for the work that you're doing, for whatever manner you would like to use this. This is an American flag that has been flown over the U.S. Capitol. And, So I'll just give a few opening comments, and then we'll turn it over to all of you to make your points or questions. If somebody is speaking who you completely, passionately disagree with, please be respectful to them. Let them have their full say. We'll ask everyone to return that same respect when it's your turn. And we thank you very much, Mayor. Mayor is going to mix up the numbers and call them out so everybody gets an equal chance to have a say. And yeah, why don't you just lay out like 5 or 6 of them? We'll go through them quickly. So just to get our heads into the challenges of the country, we have just passed an omnibus bill, which is a fancy name for a spending bill for the year 2018. We're halfway through that year, which means that we're trying to get the process going this year. So we'll actually have a spending bill for fiscal year 2019 by the end of September. That's when it should be happening. There are a bunch of things in this bill, this omnibus bill, that I was fighting for. Several of them came through my subcommittee, where I'm the top Democrat on ag. But that's ag and rural development and FDA. On the FDA portion, was able to get significant funding to address the opioid epidemic. In terms of rural development, a lot more funding for rural broadband, for a number of the rural agricultural programs, rural water infrastructure, and those sorts of pieces. So it just shouldn't, we should be able to get a bill done at the start of the year instead of halfway through the year. The federal government was engaged last year in essentially two major topics. One was health care, and there were five versions of a health care bill that would have wiped out health care for about 22 to 30 million Americans, depending on which version that was. That did not come to pass. There was also a tax bill, which, if you describe it in broad terms, it's borrowing $1.5 trillion from our children, and it delivers almost all, at least 80% of those benefits that come from that bill go to the richest Americans. And I would like to have seen 80% go to working middle class Americans. And I do think we're underfunding a lot of things such that are fundamentals for families to thrive. Public education, health care, and housing, and jobs. And that brings me to the topic of infrastructure. The President put forward a budget that reduced the existing infrastructure projects by $240 billion, and then has put forward a $200 billion infrastructure plan. The net result would be obviously a decrease in infrastructure across the country. I think we have to do the opposite. I think we've been greatly underfunding our roads, our irrigation systems, rural broadband, a whole host of things that merit more attention. It creates jobs today, and it creates a stronger economy in the future. So I'm just going to stop there. I just want to touch on a few things so you could be thinking about things you want to talk about. And with that, we're going to turn to questions. I'm going to read the last three numbers. Turn these upside down the other way. Okay. If I'll read several, raise your hands if you have that ticket handy. And if sometimes folks are shy or they took a ticket but don't really want to say anything, and we'll just keep going as quickly as we can. So the last three numbers on the ticket, 069, 082, great. Over here, 069, great. And on deck, 082 and 067. Please go ahead, and if you'd like to start with your name and maybe what part of the county you come from.
I'm from this part of this area, and my name is Mary Ann Lewis, and I was wondering how you feel the Social Security is going to come out, if you think it will be lasting.
So thank you, Mary Ann. Could you hear she was raising the issue of Social Security and whether it will be there in the future, whether it will be lasting. And we do have to carry this fight. Now, I was just talking to some friends from high school who are retiring, and they're like, we're able to retire because we have Social Security. And it has greatly changed the issue of poverty for senior Americans. Currently, the trust fund still is solvent for about another 20 years. At that point, the incoming flows would only fund about 70% of the outgoing flows, which means that we're going to have to fight to strengthen Social Security. Now, during that tax bill fight last year, we kept hearing that the colleagues who were supporting the tax bill saw it as the first part of two parts. The first was borrow money and fund the tax reductions, and the second part was offset that by reducing both Medicare and Social Security. And I was surprised when Paul Ryan came out and said exactly that the week before the tax bill passed. He said this is the first part of two parts, and we're ready, now we're going to take on and reduce these other two programs. How many folks here, we'll just take a little feedback, how many folks would like to see Social Security and Medicare greatly reduced? I didn't think so. These are intergenerational compacts. that are a foundation for our citizens to retire in dignity. And so I will be carrying the fight for that, and I think many others will, which is why I'm optimistic about that we will succeed in protecting the program, but we have to fight to do so. Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. And then on deck we had, or next we had 082, and on deck 067, right up here. Thank you.
My name is Chuck Wells, and I want to thank you for all of your service, and we've been seeing each other each year for a long time. And the question is where to begin, because we have so much that we have no control over at this point. But locally, we have the opportunity to find a way of working together during this water period, or waterless period. But I want to touch on the Jordan Cove and pipeline issue. I submitted a scoping comment to FERC, haven't heard from them, and the object of the exercise was to say that should it come to pass, there should be a surety bond that would hold the federal government, the state, and local governments harmless should any accidents occurred, and they would be responsible for remediating the landscape. They also should train each of the emergency services along the line, because they will end up being the first responders, and that should be maintained over time. I've heard nothing back about this. I realize that maybe the state can do something, but I'd just like your comments on where we are with Jordan Cove.
Yes, Jeff, thank you. And I just want to restate a piece and make sure I understand, because your point was when there is an accident, it shouldn't be at the expense of local government, it should be at the expense of the company. And that's where the surety bond comes in. Is that, absolutely, okay. Well, no, I agree with you completely, and it's a great point to make. You asked where we stand right now. FERC is undergoing their review once again for the renewed application. I think I should probably convey to you all that I have really wrestled with this project, because this project involves a tremendous number of construction jobs and then some permanent jobs. But it also involves a pipeline that goes over private land with the threat of eminent domain being used by the company. And this is not a public works in the traditional sense. This is a private for-profit company exercising, being given the power of eminent domain over families. And I said from the beginning that I thought that was wrong. I also have been concerned in wrestling with the project because we are seeing the impacts of burning fossil fuels on a global scale. In the last 10 years, we have saw here in Oregon the acceleration of the pine beetle because it's not as cold in the winter. We've seen the bigger, fiercer forest fires in the summer and the longer fire season. We have seen our oyster industry collapse in 2008. It turns out to be the acidity of the Pacific Ocean has gotten high enough that it kills the babies when they're trying to reproduce, and that's just the beginning. So, and we've seen 3 worst ever droughts here in the Klamath Basin. So I did come out earlier this year and say I thought on balance we should invest in infrastructure, but not this infrastructure. That as around the world we have to stop burning so much of fossil fuels and convert to a renewable energy. That's kind of a side issue, but I felt I should raise that. So your points on the responsibility going to the company for accidents are well taken. I certainly support that point, and thank you. I think we have 067, and not seeing a hand, 057, right here.
My name is Sven Hoyers, I live in Wilton.
I'm Sven Hoyers, I live and work in Klamath County. And my question is, what can you do and what can be done to lower the rhetoric and the antagonism that appears to be in our federal government between the right and the left. It appears most of the energy is spent on blaming the other side, and both sides need to move to the center. And what can you personally do to improve the climate?
Yeah, so this, I'll tell you, thank you for raising that. This is a big concern for our country. Most senators do not hold town halls. Senator Wyden set the example, and I've followed, but we're the rarity. And the reason why is because folks say, you know, the public dialogue has gotten so coarse, so vindictive, so poisoned, that they find it hard to hold a town hall without people just screaming at each other. And I think here in Oregon, because we've had a regular rhythm of conversations, that we've established a pretty good civic dialogue about able to wrestle with issues and listen to each other. And I hope we can sustain that. But it makes me think about the differences between when I was an intern for Senator Hatfield, which was 1976, bicentennial summer, and why is it so different now? And I'll tell you a couple things that have changed. One is at that time we had the congressional community worked a normal work week in DC. They didn't come home every weekend. And that had the disadvantage of not coming home every weekend, but had the advantage of the fact that the legislators really got to know each other, and their families were there, and their families knew each other, and the more personal connections that were forged helped with the bipartisan dialogue. Second thing is we had the 3 news networks that essentially told about the same story, about the same set of facts. It wasn't we didn't have disagreements, because we had big disagreements over the Vietnam War, over the Civil Rights Movement, and so forth, but we had the same basic set of information. Now we have 2 media worlds that are completely far apart. I make a habit of going back and forth between Fox News and MSNBC to hear the different sides, and sometimes you can't recognize the same topics being discussed. So they're presented so completely differently. I was struck a couple months ago when I was listening to I don't know if it was CNN or MSNBC, but it was basically a conversation about we've got to get to the bottom of the Russians meddling in our elections and never let it happen again. And then I went over to Fox News, and the conversation, the subtitle on the screen said "Coup against the President." And I'm like, what happened? And I was picturing like 25 people jumping over the White House fence with machine guns or what it was. So I turned up the volume, and what it was the commentator saying that the effort to understand or pursue the investigation of the Russians was really progressives trying to conduct a coup against the president. So you couldn't, the same issue was presented in 2 vastly different ways. And so we all have to wrestle with that. We have to try to get outside the bubble of our own communication world and hear both sides and read some newspapers along the way and talk to each other so that we become less divided. Personally, I hold a ton of meetings with my Republican colleagues to sit down and wrestle with specific issues, ask if they'd like to co-sponsor legislation. Every time I have a new member across the aisle, I invite them to the office and give them a little housewarming from Oregon to establish a dialogue. But I must say it's hard to do. It can take you weeks to get a meeting because the Senate is there Monday night through Thursday night, and people's calendars are booked from early morning to late night, and so there's some institutional problems that we really got to work on. There's a couple specific things that I'm proposing we explore. One is that we have a 100-day clock for executive nominations to get to the floor for a vote. Right now, we have seen both parties use the advice and consent power of the Constitution as a weapon against an executive branch of a different party. Big mistake in my mind. It was never intended to be a weapon to be used to disable an administration. And so by having a clock when the Senate would actually vote on a nominee, I think would be a big improvement. Second piece would be to have the supermajority that's used routinely on every single vote now to proceed to a bill, on an amendment, used only on final passage of a bill. So we can get on to issues, have a normal legislative debate on those issues rather than being paralyzed all along the way. It's just a couple of things that ideas I'm putting forward. I think we skipped over 067. Did that one turn up? Okay, going forward, 062. Right up front. Okay, great. And on deck, 055 and 063.
My name is Joe Matthews, and I'm a retiree on Social Security. And I want to show you these two bottles. They're both a different size. One is a 5 ounce, one is a 7 ounce. Same price. The Bureau of Budget says inflation is not at 1 or 2%, right? This has gone up 10%. And it's not only that, but you look at your cereal boxes, they have the same size box, smaller amount, same price, and sometimes up, a higher price. So we are being bamboozled by this lack of interest in our cost of living. And as a person on a definite fixed income, this is killing us. You all see this? I'm sure you know about it. Is there anything to be done about it?
I haven't seen that brute since I was a kid. I didn't know it still existed. So this comes down to the Consumer Price Index, and there's a Consumer Price Index that looks at the economy as a whole, and there's one that looks at the portfolio of things that people buy when they're retired, and it's called CPIE. Now, the government will tell you that stands for CPI, Consumer Price Index Elderly. I say it stands for CPI Experienced. And it does show a much higher rate in most years than the general CPI, because you've got health care, and you've got housing, you've got food, things that have been going up at a faster rate than the economy as a whole. And so your point's well taken. That's why I've been advocating for the CPIE to be utilized. By the way, there was an effort to go the other direction, and it was called the chained CPI. Does that ring a bell from a couple years ago? Chained CPI? And the chained CPI was actually even worse than the regular CPI in terms of evaluating what seniors face. So I've supported a number of different bills that would put the CPI for experienced Americans to work. And let's take another chance for feedback. How many folks think it would make more sense to use a consumer price index for seniors that actually reflects what seniors buy? How many think that that's a bad idea? Okay, thank you. And do we have anybody on deck in those numbers? 55, 055, and 063. Okay, right here.
Hello, my name is Art Knight. I live in the city, and I do want to thank you for coming, you and Whiten. It's like 2 out of 100 people in the Senate. That's an unbelievable access. 67 people. I really appreciate that. I've been coming for 12 years here. I can remember you coming to town when you were looking for this position the first time, and there were 8 of us downtown. So,
thank you for coming out.
Anyway, so what is that? That was probably 08. Right?
That was 08.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to the March on Our Lives in Washington, D.C. a week ago or so, and found the focus on gun-related issues to be simple and sensible. I would like to know what the Congress and you are doing about gun violence reform. Since the March, I have heard very little about the progress that Congress has made regarding legislation in this area. Will this be another issue that we forget about until the next major event? And then specifically, if you want to get that, the one thing that I learned there that I didn't know is that is there going to be research into gun-related deaths and injuries, and will there be funding for this research? And that's been on hold since 1996. That basically discouraging or preventing actual research, so you have numbers, so you can figure out where all this gun violence is happening.
Thank you, Art. And so there's a lot of ideas that are being put forward, and I'll mention some of them and get some of your all's reaction to them. One is to have a national background check system similar to Oregon's, where each sale, whether it's at a gun store, gun show, or Craigslist sale, all go through the background check system, and then try to have more better information into the computer system so it can actually get better results out. So how many would consider that, to have that nationwide, a step forward? How many folks would not like that or oppose it? Okay. So that's one piece, and I think that's probably the piece that has the broadest support. You mentioned a second piece, which is research. As you correctly stated, research has been banned into gun violence by law for now going on 20 years plus. And so there's the conversation is why? Why, you know, this affects a lot of Americans. Should we do research and understand the issues better? And it's you know, we have the big events where more than a dozen people die, and we have the daily gun violence that plagues our nation. How many folks would support lifting the ban on research in order to, well, understand gun violence better? How many folks would oppose that? Third piece in the conversation is about basically assault rifles and big magazines. All of the, virtually, I had my team go back and look at the cases where 6 or more people died. And virtually everyone involves an assault rifle with a very large magazine, 50 or 100 shells, which I think gives the person who walks into a room with that the ability to just create a lot of carnage in a short period of time and then reload. So the question is whether those should be, we should continue to sell those or not. And this is probably more controversial, but let's take feedback on that. How many would support not selling, reinstating the assault rifle ban, but also a ban on magazines over 10 bullets? Yes. How many folks would oppose that? Yeah, a little bit more controversial. So those are some of the main things. In terms of the Senate actually taking action, no bill can be on the floor unless Mitch McConnell allows it to be on the floor, just the way the Senate rules work. It used to be you could put up an amendment on any bill. In 2007, but the majority leader can block, because the majority leader has the privilege of doing the First Amendment and can essentially put that in place and not act on it, which blocks everybody else from putting an amendment forward. If you ever hear the term filling the tree, that's the language that's used. You block all other amendments from occurring. And so in 2017, outside of the reconciliation bill, not a single amendment was put on the floor of the Senate and voted on. So this is just to say there won't be a debate on the floor on any of these unless Mitch McConnell decides to allow such a debate. And that kind of comes down to public pressure across the country. I think there's a chance that a bill will be put on the floor because there's bipartisan support for some of these pieces of the dialogue, but I'm not sure. If that'll happen or not. It's completely up to Mitch McConnell. We're getting closer now to the election cycle in terms of primaries are around the corner. Our primary here in Oregon is in May, and when you get to that point, majority leaders tend to start getting less interested in having issues debated. So we'll all find out, but I'm not real optimistic.
Are you saying on this issue or on all issues?
On all issues, the majority leader can block the bill or amend it.
You said none have gone through. Are you referring to just this issue? Or
No, in 2017, there were no amendments on any issue at all allowed to be debated on the floor outside the reconciliation bill, which has a special set of rules. No, when I was first there as an intern, Senator Hatfield asked me to take on the 1976 Tax Reform Act when it went to the floor of the Senate. At that time, there was no television and there were no cell phones, So the senators had no idea what the amendments were being debated. They'd see they'd hear the bells ringing and the lights light up, and they'd run to the floor, and then a staff member would meet them as they come out of the elevator and brief them on what the amendment was and what people had been saying. And so on that bill, I was that staff member. And so I'd greet Senator Hatfield and I'd say, here it is, here's what people are arguing, pro and con, and he'd run on the floor and vote. And then, because the tree was never filled. And so then, as soon as the vote was done, 5 to 10 senators would try to get the attention of the presiding officer. And it's the president of the Senate, so they'd say, President, Mr. President, and because they're all speaking at once, the chair is supposed to recognize whoever spoke first. That's impossible because they're speaking at once. So they could basically go back and forth between Democrats and Republicans offering amendments, and about every hour you'd vote on an amendment. And it would just keep going until people got exhausted and said, enough, we've had a chance to present our issues. That process is completely gone. And I must say, it's built out of the fear of legislators having to vote on complicated things, and sometimes amendments that are designed for campaign ads, quite frankly. But we've got to restore that. We've got to be able to have Congress and Senate, certainly, that can put ideas forward and debate them. We just had a banking bill go through, and there were tons of ideas about what we should do to either make the bill better or on issues related to the bill. For example, here in Oregon, we don't have any banking for our cannabis industry. So we have a huge amount, hundreds of millions of dollars of cash transactions, invitation to organized crime, to money laundering, to cheating your employees, to cheating on your taxes, to being robbed because you have these huge amounts of cash. Terrible idea. So I wanted to put forward an amendment. I have a bill called the Safe Banking Act. I wanted to put that forward on this banking bill and say, let's debate this. Let's vote on whether we should have this cash economy across the country of billions of dollars rather than having it electronic transactions where things can be monitored. But I couldn't put that forward because of this. That's just one small example. I think I had 8 amendments of good ideas on the banking system. I thought they were good ideas anyway. That got no opportunity to be considered. I think that while I understand political leaders not wanting members to be exposed to difficult issues, it seems to me if you're not willing to take a stand on difficult issues, then get out of office. Okay, we had 063. And on deck, 064 and 068 and 078.
Hello, Senator. Jerry O'Brien. I'm from the Herald and News. And I know we talked earlier today, but I'd like to ask this question again. We are heading into a very divisive water year between the Bureau of Reclamation, the irrigators that are demanding the water, and the tribes that need the water for fish preservation. I'm wondering, you met with the irrigators and the tribes today. What did they tell you, and what can you do to bring both these sides together to maybe ameliorate any kind of trouble that might happen this year?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think everyone remembers the challenge that we had back in 2001, and when the conflict was very intense. I wasn't in office then, but I did come into office in January 2009. And different stakeholders in the community said, would you please engage and help be part of this conversation, and if we can work out an agreement, help get it passed by Congress. And I said yes, absolutely. I think for stakeholders who have been at odds with each other, to get into the same room and understand the issue from each other's perspectives, be able to start to understand each other, creates the sort of understanding that can lead to an agreement and to cooperation, even when there isn't an agreement. And that led to the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement. And maybe everybody who was involved in developing that could just wave their hands. So I want to, and Becky, hide up here, so many people, let's give them a hand for working together to try to do So Congress wasn't able to get the bill passed that supported those 2 key agreements. They expired. And now the challenge is to have a dialogue that brings people back together, at least to understand where each other are at and cooperate through the challenging summer we're going to have. I mean, there will be folks whose, it isn't just waiting for summer, I mean, who won't be able to get the financing. And you asked about the conversation this morning. It's being pointed out that the uncertainty of water affects whether our farmers can get the financing for the seed, for the fertilizer, and so on and so forth, to be able to plant. And they might be out of business in the near future. So it's not just an issue of as the drought descends later in the summer. We still have the same basic issues that are being struggled with. We have the fish in the lake, the fish in the stream. We have the dam removal, which is on a separate track. We have the goal of sufficient water for the strength of the ranching and farming community. And we have historic issues such as the tribe's forest lands were taken away and turned into Wainema National Forest. It's the only forest like that in the country. When the tribe was terminated before it was restored. When it was restored, the lands were not restored. There's many issues that are so important for a dialogue. I should introduce Amy Amrine, by the way, who's been immersed in this now for 10 years, working hard to help. And she is my field rep, so you can also think of her as someone you can call on any topic to be engaged in the community. Both groups this morning helped share their perspectives on the challenges ahead. I encourage both groups to at least engage in dialogue, not necessarily dialogue with any plan that you're going to get to an agreement very quickly, but the sense that people could talk to each other and could try to see the world through each other's eyes was very powerful as we took on the worst ever droughts in 2010 and 2013. And now we may be right back in that same situation. Meanwhile, if you're carrying on dialogue, it does start to build a foundation, possibly for seeing a vision in the future where the community could come together again around a plan. And this time, if the stakeholders come together around a plan, we have got to have a commitment on both sides of the aisle, on both houses, that we're going to get whatever Congress needs to do to on its part to make that, to solidify that agreement. They have to be prepared to get it on the floor and get it passed and get it done in support of the community. (064), (068), or (078). And then we got some more numbers. Wait, any of those three? No? Okay. We have 083. Okay, great. Over here, and then on deck, 054 and 085 and 049. By the way, just to expand, one of the things that Greg Walden and Senator Wyden and I were immersed in, we have some real advantage for Oregon in that we have Greg Walden, who is chair of the Energy Committee on the House side and a member of leadership. Senator Wyden, who serves as one of the, well, he's the longest serving Democrat on the Energy Committee in the Senate. He's technically not the ranking member there because he's the ranking member on finance, but he still has a lot of experience and clout. And then I'm serving on appropriations, so when it comes to a spending bill to be able to finance things, Oregon has a voice on the spending side, which we haven't had a voice on the spending side since Senator Hatfield retired. And so it was one of the deals I made when I ran for the office. I said, because the odds of my winning were very, very low, as you all may remember. I said, but if I win, if I run this race and I win, Oregon needs to have a voice on the spending committee, on the appropriations committee. And I extracted a promise of being appointed to that committee, not immediately, but as one of the first members of my class to be appointed to it. So I'm delighted to be on that committee and be able to fight for so many pieces that are relevant to our state. So we do have a good team to try to be supportive of what the community works out down the lines. And a piece of that we just got was funding related both to helping with the fish effort in the lake. We recognize we have a real issue there with the suckers that are in the lake are 30 years old. The classes over the last 30 years have died. Within a few months, the babies have died very, very quickly. If we don't figure that out soon, we're in a world of trouble. So that's one of the places we need to work together on. And so that's a piece of the puzzle. Then we were also able to get an account increased by about by a significant amount, but about 10 to 12 million of that we anticipate will be able to come to help this community get through this summer. And so that is a win that may come to play very shortly. Okay, yes.
My name is Marla Jean Rowe, and my question originally was going to be about how you felt about sensible grant control, which Art and I brought up. I'd never been to a town alley before, so I'm nervous. So I Googled you on Wikipedia, and I'm really impressed.
Only believe the good things.
I'm really impressed by what you've accomplished, and I'm very impressed by the way you explain your viewpoints. And I also wanted to say I was sort of saddened and shocked when I read this last thing on Wikipedia. One of his cousins, Rebecca Ann Carnes, was killed alongside 8 others in the 2015 Umpqua Community College shooting. And I'm thinking, when it hits people that that are in leadership and hits them personally, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but it just really impacted how you comport yourself and what you say. And I want to thank you very much for what you do in the political area.
Yeah, that's personally a very painful moment.
I'm sorry.
I think about how this young woman, Rebecca, she had graduated from high school a few months earlier. She had on her cap the words, "And so the adventure begins." That was on her graduation camp. And a few months later, the adventure ended. Gun violence has touched my family in many ways over the years. And I think we need to keep wrestling with how to honor the Second Amendment while finding a way to greatly reduce the carnage we're experiencing. Thanks. Zero 054-085-049. Which one of those should I retire there? Okay.
My name is Lynn Hannigan. Something I'd like to bring up has to do with the public lands in Oregon are no longer available to the public. This last winter I tried to go out coyote hunting and I found every single access road on Bryant Mountain off of Silver Lake Road gated off and closed. All season roads, gravel roads, well kept up roads, everything is closed to the public. The sign said that they were put up there by Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Reclamation. The reasons that they used were they didn't want to do road maintenance, so they didn't want anybody using the roads, so they didn't have to maintain them, and they wanted to protect the deer herds. Kind of a joke. And that public belongs to us. They have no right to tell the public they can't access land that belongs to us. I'd like to know why those signs are still there, because the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, as soon as he took office, made a statement that he was going to enhance the public use of public lands, and they're not doing it. What are you going to do about that?
And when you contacted them afterwards, and that was the reason they gave for why those roads were closed?
No, the reason they gave was right on the signs.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I hadn't heard of that particular situation. A lot of the challenge we have is with old logging roads that aren't the gravel roads you're speaking of, not the ones that are being maintained. But I do, if you run into this, if you could call Amy, because I'd like to be able to call them up and ask the question and understand whether that was different than the year before, if it's part of a 30-month closure because of some specific permanent closure. Okay, well, let's find out about that specifically, because those shed light on the broader set of policies and how they're being implemented. I did have a conversation with Secretary Zinke about he was telling me that a series of things like under some of the rules, areas were shut down to hunting that shouldn't be shut down to hunting, and he was talking about areas that actually open to hunting, and then he was talking about areas that were closed to fishing. We checked, and they were actually open. And then he was really expressing the desire to make sure all the maintained roads stay open. So I'm surprised to hear it, but I'll have to check into it, and I'll have Amy follow up with you to. I think she just handed her card to you, so we can make sure I follow up with you personally to get you an answer on that and the broader question. But if you have examples of places and situations, the feedback is helpful to me to be able to hold that conversation with the Interior Secretary. Thank you. How many folks have been out hunting and found roads closed that weren't previously closed? Quite a few. Okay, thank you. 052. You have 3 minutes? Okay, this maybe we're running out of time here. 052, 088, 094, 058, 077. Okay, I think you get the last question here.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I live in Klamath. I didn't prepare anything, but it's been a concern of mine for some time. I'll be 30 this year. I'm a single young woman, and I live in a community where it's mostly retirees and college students that are probably going to leave this area, unfortunately. The cost of living here is amazingly low, but where I come from, it's not. And I'm concerned about my future going forward. I have much longer to work and survive. And like I said, I'm single, and I'm concerned about how I'll be able to afford my own home someday and retire without Social Security, things like that.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you. And I think you're reflecting the high level of angst, of concern over the future. When I got out of high school, which was 1974, I'd seen my parents' generation go through a phenomenal increase in living from the Great Depression on through the mid-70s. And you could look at it on a chart, or you could also see it. All these families who had grown up in very tiny homes, uninsulated, outdoor plumbing, as to say, no plumbing, pit latrines and no electricity, and now they could buy a 3-bedroom house and a car and a garage to put it in, and huge leap forward. And I thought, well, wow, look at the leap that's going to happen in my lifetime. Guess what? Didn't happen. Working America's wages have been flat or declining since 1974, since I got out of high school. That's, and they're now taking almost 4.5 decades. The wealth of the nation has gone up steadily on the same track. And that's why, really, I'll tell you, I was so disturbed about that tax bill that passed, because one of it increasing the debt by $1.5 trillion, but the second was that the benefits were going to the best off in our society. I mean, how many houses does a billionaire need to live in, basically? Okay, maybe a little trickles down. They do some renovations here and there, but we've seen that trickle down doesn't really work. If you want to build the economy, you've got to build the foundation for families to thrive. Then they can buy things, and companies only make more things if they have more customers. So you increase business even as you increase the strength of the middle class. this is a battle we're engaged in, and now I'm going to tell you that here's what I feel is the big challenge in our country. We had a Constitution that starts with those words. What are the first three words of the Constitution? We the people. And if you see the document from across a room, they're written in supersized font. That's the mission statement of our Constitution, we the people. Jefferson said we will only have government that reflects the will of the people if the political voice is distributed equally among the voting citizens. And so he called it the equal voice. It says the mother principle of our country. Well, Citizens United is the opposite of that. This is a Supreme Court decision that says the wealthiest can put unlimited sums into campaigns in America. And that means that the voice of ordinary people is drowned out by the voice of the people at the top. And so instead of having government of, by, and for the people, we're getting government of, by, and for the powerful and the privileged. That's the basic war we're in this country. And it's playing itself out in everything from a budget that cuts support for rural development and housing and education, to the tax bill, to the health care bill that would have wiped out health care for 22 to 30 million Americans. And so this is the, I love the idea of a country where you have a vision of a foundation for every family to thrive. That, my dad, mechanic, he was a millwright in Riddle until the mill closed, and then worked on machinery related to the logging and the highway world, the big equipment that works. And when I was in grade school, he said, you go through the doors of that schoolhouse and you work hard, you can do almost anything because we live here in America. And the idea that every child has an opportunity to thrive, no matter which side of the railroad tracks they come from, that is a beautiful vision. That is an American vision. That is a vision that's in the first three words of our Constitution, we the people. And we haven't sustained that vision very well over the last 4 decades. And so there are a lot of resources to go around. Those resources that we have that can go into infrastructure to create jobs now, to strengthen the economy in the future, that can support the people, the ability of the people to be able to afford to buy a home. You mentioned, I think, did you mention home ownership? Yeah, I thought you did. Okay, so when my parents bought the house they live in, I think my dad was earning about $7,000 a year, and the house cost $14,000. So twice a working person's wage. Now, I still live in that same blue-collar community in the east edge of the Portland metropolitan area. And now people in kind of similar roles are earning $40,000 to $50,000. The houses in my blue-collar neighborhood are selling for $300,000. So it's 6 times working rate. So it's, even though the wealth of the nation has gone like this, much, much harder for people to become homeowners. And that's before we start talking about college debt.
So then I guess the second part of my question would be, what hope do I have to look forward to then?
Well, so and you hear that? The second part of the question, what hope? Because we're not giving up the battle. And that's why elections are so important. It's why town halls are so important, because we have to carry on a dialogue about where our country is growing in order to provide the pressure to put it on a path where it really is being run by and for the people. So that's what drove me into public life, was this fight, we can't give up. And we have seen America in other tough moments find a pathway out of an abyss to a much better place. And that's what we have to fight to do. And you're all part of that by showing up here and being part of this dialogue. So thank you so much. But let's not forget the vision our nation was founded on and how important that is to provide the ability for a foundation for success for every person. Thank you.